Today we're joined by the extraordinary Tom Lippincott, an 8 and 6 string guitarist who's been a cornerstone of the South Florida jazz scene for decades. With a master's degree in jazz performance and a teaching career spanning institutions like FIU and Broward College, Tom blends technical mastery with boundless creativity. He's collaborated with jazz greats like Dave Liebman and Ben Monder, performed worldwide, and continues to inspire with his latest album, 20 years later. So tune as we explore Tom's innovative approach to jazz guitar and his journey as a performer and educator. So, Tom, good to see you. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Abe. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Tom, one of the things that sets you apart from your average guitar player would be the exploration of the 8 string guitar. I mean, I've never played an 8 string guitar, but I imagine they have so much harmonic potential. So, talk about a little bit the mindset, of what drew you to the playing the extended range instruments.
Um, well, I've always been really fascinated by harmony, and some of my biggest heroes are piano players. Bill Evans is probably one of my biggest heroes, and so I've always looked for ways to be able to, translate more of that kind of vocabulary onto guitar. And at some point along the way, I discovered players like George Van Eps and Lenny Breau. And George Van Eps, as you probably know, was famous for playing a seven-string guitar with a low A, and then Lenny became well known later in his life for playing a seven-string with a high A. So I had the idea sometime around the 1990s that I wanted to maybe get a seven-string guitar and tune it the way Lenny Breau did, just to try it out. And it became obvious to me as soon as I tried tuning a string up to a high A on a regular guitar that that wasn't going to work. At the time there were seven-string guitars you could buy because Steve Vai had made that popular.
Right.
So, you could go to Guitar Center and get a $300 guitar that was seven strings. So that was what I was going to do at first. And so I realized right away I was going to have to have something custom done because Lenny's guitars were short scale, or at least his last one was short scale. I think the one that worked the best for him. So once I arrived at that conclusion, I realized I had kind of a blank slate to work with. And since I was a George Van Eps fan too, I said, why not just do kind of two in one since I, could do anything I want. So that's basically what led me to that.
Do you feel like when you started playing on the a new instrument, it was almost like I'm completely doing something brand new, or were you able to translate much of what you already knew onto it? Like, was it a big, big change, or was it like, this is something I can handle?
Well, that's what I thought at first. That, I just thought, oh, I'll just play it as a six string and kind of gradually get used to the other two strings. But what it was almost like a whole different instrument because, particularly with the high A string, at least for me, I realized as soon as I got it that my hand is so used to using the edge of the fingerboard as a reference, and it just threw me for a loop because like none of the strings were where I thought they should be anymore. And it took me, I think, almost like a year just to get to the point where I could ignore the two outer strings and kind of just play it as if it was a six-string guitar. And then, just very gradually since then, I've worked on getting to know the other strings better. The low B string was easier to integrate, I think, because you don't typically play as much stuff on the low strings. It's mostly for bass notes and so forth. So, that one wasn't quite as crazy, but the high A string is still a work in progress. And I've been playing eight string now. What is that? I started in 2001. So what is that, like 23 years or something? And I still feel like I'm, just kind of uh, getting to know the high A string and integrate it with all the others. So
No,
it's
that's
a
great
work in
stuff.
progress.
Have you had students over the years who you have said, like I'm gonna go the 8 string route too, or is it mostly just like, because there are those students who you can just influence them so much that they're gonna go in the same direction of you. Has that ever happened?
It's happened a few times in a very superficial way, but I've always discouraged my students from copying me or I mean I really feel strongly as a teacher that that's not my job is to try to create versions of myself or anything like that. My goal as a artist and as a musician has always been to find my own voice and keep refining that. And I encourage all my students to do the same thing. With that said, I have in the past had several students who expressed interest in the eight string guitar. Just, they go, oh, wow, I see all the possibilities. I'd love to have one or whatever. And I've had a few that have actually gotten an eight string guitar, but if I remember correctly, I don't think I've ever had a student who did the high A string. They always have done the two low strings, which is easier to find because in the last 20 years or so, the progressive metal players have started using eight string guitars with the two
Right.
low strings. So it's not that hard to find those instruments now.
Yeah, and I know you're in Florida, so how's the music scene down in Florida? I mean, we there's amazing players wherever you go, but do you kind of have like your set musicians who you are able to work with or just, play sessions with and you know,
Yeah, for sure. There's a great music scene here in South Florida, very healthy, and there's lots and lots of great musicians. And I'm always marveling at, for the most part, how just kind and supportive all the other musicians are to each other around here. I think the fact that the University of Miami is here is a big part of that because, so many musicians flock to Miami to go to that school. And a lot of them end up staying around either for a few years or even permanently, like kind of like I did.
yeah.
I moved here to go there and just never ended up leaving. Although I actually am going to be leaving pretty soon. We can talk
Oh,
about that
really?
in a minute if you'd like to. But
Where are you moving to?
well, it's kind of an interesting story. Uh, my wife, for years, was interested in the fact that her grandparents, when she was a kid, had bought a van and kind of lived out of it and driven all over the U.S. And she always thought that was such a cool thing and was always kind of running the idea by me. And as a musician that's been in South Florida for so long, I was like, oh, no way. There's no way I could ever do that. I'm comfortable here. I don't want to leave, whatever. And over the years, I've sort of started to change my mind on that. And so as of a couple of years ago, we've actually started working on that. We bought a van and we're having it built out as an RV. And as a matter of fact, according to our original plan, we were already going to be on the road now. The van is taking longer to get built out than we were planning. So,
Because I assume you're going to be sleeping in the van. There'll be like a place to, for food and all that stuff, and
mhm,
plus your instruments and
right. Yeah. Although I am getting rid of quite a bit of stuff. I've got a few students who've agreed to hang on to a few pieces of gear that I just couldn't bear to part with permanently. But yeah, so the plan is we're gonna live on the road for at least a year and just drive all over the U.S. So it's a real big change for me. It's scary but exciting at the same time. And I'm 58 years old. I'm going to be 60 in a couple of years, and I'm realizing, seeing mortality, and I've been in South Florida for so long. I kind of just feel like I'd like to have one more chapter in my life to do something totally different, and I can't think of much different than this,
yeah, I got to
So,
travel across the country when I was 14 or 15. Basically
mhm,
I went to like a camp where you just go on a bus and get to explore and you would stay in campgrounds and everything like that. But when you're 14 years old, like you don't realize that this is such a precious opportunity and
mhm,
you're just kind of like, oh, I want to make friends and meet girls and stuff like that. But
right.
then but now I would imagine it's like it would be completely different. So, are you taking like a sabbatical from? Are you like, do you plan on returning, or is it just no
No,
plan
yeah,
right
I'm
now?
not planning on coming back to Florida. I actually have quit all my teaching jobs, my university teaching jobs as of this year. With that in mind, like I said, I thought I was already going to be gone by now. I'm kind of lamenting the fact because, I turned down a lot of gigs for this season and I got out of my teaching jobs and then here I still am. So I've luckily enough, a lot of the people that I work with have been nice enough to continue to like find places for me to work. But that's been one frustration. But
Well, you know
yeah,
what too? I mean, and even when like let's say you decide in like another year or two, like, oh, I'm ready to like settle into some new area or something. The way I came across your music was through YouTube.
mhm.
I just did a deep dive one day and I thought it was really interesting and just was really just intrigued by the way you played and everything. So let's say you settle in a new city or something, then you have all this content available online to start the next chapter.
Yeah, that was my thinking as well. I mean, I've been kind of thinking of that for a while now, maybe 10 or 15 years, that, if I can get to a point where a big part of how I make my living is not dependent on where I live, then I can hypothetically live anywhere. So that's part of our mission as we're traveling around, is to decide where we want to end up. And sort of that'll be, in a way, a retirement, but I'm definitely not planning on retiring from playing by any
Yeah.
means.
And that's the thing, the internet has just changed so much. Like, did you know that your channel and all your videos were gonna gain as much popularity as they did? Like, how did that start out in the beginning? Because it's been quite a long time you've been on YouTube and everything.
Yeah, no, I really just kind of did it for fun, more or less, and actually probably still kind of am doing it just for fun. Um, I started that series, I think about a year ago, called Modern Jazz Noise, where I talk about, using effects pedals, and that seems to have taken off more than just about anything else. But I'm still really just doing that for fun because, as I say in some of those videos, I feel like that's something that I saw a distinct lack of on YouTube. There's so many gazillions of videos out there about people talking about effects, but very rarely do you find it from the perspective of a jazz player. And I
Yeah,
just
no, if you go on like if you buy a new pedal or something, you'll see just them playing like a couple of open chords on it or
mm,
something, or the minor pentatonic scale. But it's interesting because some guitar players, I mean, who are very much more, I don't want to use the word traditional, but let's just say old school, they almost look at players who play with effects and pedals almost with contempt in a way,
hmm
which I've always found to be, a bit ridiculous. Um, I think it's changing more now with just the way the instrument is just developing. But like, did you ever come across players like that who were like critical? Because I mean, like, I remember I used to play with like a lot of reverb and like, I'm not gonna name the person, but they just started like going off on me about it. Like, you need to stop this. Like, were there people who just,
Oh,
were
absolutely.
discouraging
Yeah.
when you were younger?
Yeah, people, can be very opinionated about that thing, and the jazz guitar community seems to what I've noticed is that it seems to have sort of divided into two camps. You
I was
know,
just gonna, I
the
was like, it's like right down the
yeah,
middle.
there's like all the traditionalists that feel very strongly that unless you're playing a hollow body guitar directly into an amp with no effects, then you're not really a jazz player. And then there's the other side of the spectrum that it's kind of like whatever you need to do to get the sound in your head out there, and I know I'm very biased because I'm in that other camp, but I definitely feel like the most important jazz guitarists of the last 20 or 30 years tend to be the ones on that side of the fence. Again, granted, I'm very biased that way, but I mean, there are guitar players that kind of don't fit that little mold. Like one of my favorite guitar players, I was just listening to him last night, Peter Bernstein.
Oh yeah, yeah, my old
I mean,
teacher actually.
oh, okay, that's great. And he's amazing. And I almost feel like he's got this magical ability that I don't know where it could possibly come from. Maybe you can tell me that he's able, on a superficial level, you might think, oh, he's one of these old school guys that just plugs straight into the amp and everything. But man, he sounds so modern, and yet, he could fit in perfectly with a bunch of really old school players. And yet at the same time, he plays with Brad Meldau and Kurt Rosenwinkel and people like that and totally fits in with them. And it just seems to me like a magic trick. Like, how does he do that?
Yeah, he's very special.
Mm,
And one thing I took away from him, he plays a lot with three fingers only.
mm,
So almost like milking the notes, like with less fingers, I know can influence the way you approach the instrument. I'm not gonna, this is just from observations that I observed, but he really taught me how to attack the instrument more and stuff like that. But yeah, Pete's amazing, and I've always been grateful I got a chance to study with him. But you're right. I mean, about he can definitely fit into both those
Hmm.
camps. But it is interesting how they can almost battle each other.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, can we be influenced by Grant Green and by John Abercrombie?
Right. Yeah.
I
I
don't under, I am I'm very I don't understand why there's this almost like clash. It's just I know because it's not what the music's about at all. And that's the thing. That's the beauty of it that there are those different camps and
mhm.
dichotomies.
Yeah, I totally agree. The other sort of mission for me with that series that I'm doing is one thing I've noticed is it does seem to me like a lot of the jazz guitar players that do use pedals almost feel like they're embarrassed about it. And, like when you hear people asking, like, oh, what's that pedal you use? It's almost like they don't want to talk about, it. Well, that doesn't really matter. What you want to talk about is my triad pairs, or whatever. And I can't help but think that a little bit of that is based on this sort of shame that we've had put on us that, if we use effects, then it automatically makes us less than somehow. And I'd like to see that, become not a thing so that we can not be embarrassed about the fact that we use pedals or whatever it might be, to get
Yeah, but
that.
even if that comes to be, there'll always be like the yin and yang component of
Hmm.
things where even if they're okay with the pedals, then then it'll come down to the scales they use or something like that.
Right.
Or playing more legato versus playing all the notes picked or something like that. There'll always
Mhm.
be these little things, but there's so much to draw from, which is the cool part about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And to
I'm
me,
sure you love
like,
old school players too. I mean, I'm sure.
absolutely. I mean, Wes Montgomery is still one of my biggest heroes. And every time I listen to him again, I'm just completely mystified as to how he does what he does.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Did you get a chance to see any of the like old school players? You're a little older than me. I'm 37. So did you
Mhm.
like, anyone who was like in that next
Uh,
generation, after you?
yeah, I mean, I got to see Joe Pass a couple of times.
Oh wow.
Um, I saw Jim Hall a couple of times, and actually, one of the biggest moments of my life is getting to meet him one time. Got to hang out with him for kind of an afternoon, and that was, one of
Just
the.
you and him?
No, it's actually a good friend of mine who lives in the Washington D.C. area named Steve Herberman. Um, they did a thing in, I think it was 2003, called the First World Guitar Congress. And it was held at a school that Steve was teaching at the time. So he was sort of the coordinator of it. And they had gotten Jim Hall to come in, and they actually commissioned him to write a piece for orchestra and guitar.
Oh wow.
And Steve was nice enough to bring me over when they were rehearsing that piece and introduce me to Jim. And we kind of hung out for a couple of hours. And it was just such an amazing thing that, it's one of my best memories ever.
I
So,
imagine when you like are face to face with him and that you're just like it's like one of those moments where you wake up to reality in a sense. You know what I mean? Like,
mm,
is this real? Like, and
right. Yeah.
when you met him, did he say anything that has stuck with you, or is it just mostly like his energy that you could take away from it? Because even
Yeah.
those
It was
little things, just speaking
absolutely,
with them.
yeah, really just his energy. I do remember Steve kind of pulling me aside right before we were going to meet him and saying, now don't ask him any music questions, be cool. Like, don't just treat him like he's a regular guy. And so I kind of took that advice, and I'm glad that he said that because, I would have been tempted to say, like, what's your secret to the universe or whatever. But we just kind of talked about, everyday stuff. And he was such a, down to earth, unassuming person, just so kind that he just exuded that. So that was maybe the biggest thing that I took from it.
Yeah, I've always kind of felt like Jim Hall is the Bill Evans of guitar in a way. Like I've said that before, and some people agree with it, and
Hmm.
that like or other people say like that's kind of a loaded statement. But I don't know how you. I mean, just even because even when you hear them play together, uh,
Hmm.
remarkable.
Yeah, amazing. Some of my favorite recordings are those two records they did together. Well, actually, they did more than that, but the two duo records they did.
So,
Yeah,
did you have any mentors, like as far as people who you really give credit to for just getting you on the track to becoming an individual, like anyone that you can think of that you would not be the musician you are today without them, whether working with them or just someone you got a chance to, study with a little bit, anyone like that?
sure. The first one that comes to mind is Mick Goodrick. Um, he was somebody that I only got to meet him in person. I took one lesson with him in the mid 1990s, but that one lesson just impacted my whole life. Just still to this day.
How long was it? Do you remember?
I think it was supposed to be an hour, but it ended up being like an hour and a half. We were still talking, and his next student knocked on the door, and he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, we have to finish up." And I remember him saying, "Anytime you want to come back, I'd love to have you, as take some lessons again." And one of my big regrets is that I never took him up on that. But I live in Florida, and he was in Boston, so it wasn't like it was right around the corner.
What was it about the lesson with him? Just being in the room with him and playing duo, or did he show you anything that just opened you up?
Actually, we never even took guitars out. I did bring my guitar fully expecting to play as you normally do in a private lesson. But the thing that happened was I had been going through this kind of a little bit of a sort of personal crisis in a way where I was feeling like I didn't have my own voice as a musician, as a guitar player, and I was really frustrated. I was feeling like how is this ever going to happen? And so when I was getting ready to take this lesson with him, I wrote this big long thing, basically like an essay about all my frustrations. So I brought that with me and I told him, I said, I have written all this stuff down. And he said, why don't you just read it to me? So I did. And as I read it, we just talked about, we stopped every once in a while and we would talk about some of the things I had written. And that basically ended up being the whole lesson. So it was really, and the takeaway, I mean, what he said was stop worrying so much about it and just let it happen. You're already on your path, whether you like it or not. And the funny thing was, after that lesson, it was almost like, yeah, I stopped worrying about it. And before I knew it, I did kind of start to feel like my own voice was coming out.
That's great. And I kind of feel like, we have these moments where it's like, oh, we stop worrying for a little bit, and then we start again, and then we
Mhm.
stop. But I think that's just the journey of it. You're gonna be in that phase where you're like, then you're in that phase like, yeah, everything's flowing. And I think but that's the thing. A journey is not just going straight, it's going sideways and up and down.
Yep.
So, but that's really cool that it was almost like a, jazz guitar therapy with like
Mhm.
Sigmund Freud or something.
Yep. Yeah.
It's so cool.
Another moment that is imprinted on my memory is I remember, we were talking about some kind of really esoteric stuff, and then he pointed out his window and said, "Who's to say that we sitting up here in our ivory tower know any more than this truck driver out there listening to Achy Breaky Heart," which at the time that was, the big popular song. And, he said, it's all subjective, it's art, so, we don't really know whether we're we're really getting to the good stuff or whatever. We're just two people that are trying to look for something meaningful for us.
Yeah, I mean, but I think he's totally right. There is that you kind of have to dig deep philosophically too, because even when you see certain musicians who are like on the best stages who work together, who play nothing alike whatsoever. You know what
Mm,
I mean? It is just a subjective thing, and it's just
right.
I think that's part of it. But the mental part is just the mental part is the bigger battle, or at least
Mm,
half than the technical this stuff.
yeah,
So no, Tom, this is great. Where can everybody find you? Do you want to, just mention your social media and everything, all that stuff?
sure. I've got a website, which I guess it's weird. Websites are weird because like nobody really uses them, but everybody feels like you have to have one. So I do still have a website. It's just tomlippincott.com. And I am on Facebook and I'm sort of uh, hesitantly on Instagram. I'm not a big Instagram fan, but I'll post my gigs up there usually. or if I put out a new video or whatever. And other than that, I don't participate in TikTok or any of that kind of stuff. I'm kind of against that because I really feel like people's attention span is just getting smaller and smaller, and
Well,
I
yeah,
don't want
everyone
to be
asks
the
me, why is your
problem.
podcast only 25 to 30 minutes? I'm like, people don't have the patience to sit through a
Yeah.
3 hour interview. So no, I really appreciate you taking the time with to talk to me, and I hope the journey is going to be great on the road and everything. And I hope you find a new place to settle. And I'm sure you'll make your mark there when you start playing and everything. So just want to say thank you again.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me. It was great to talk to you.
Oh
I
yeah,
hope we get to
absolutely. We'll have to do
hang
it
out in
again.
person sometime.
Yeah, definitely.